Sorry to cut off that pleasant music, but no, we're going to go back to the Canadian Underground Forum. Welcome back. We're going into the last session of the day, and we're going to concentrate, go a little bit of a deep dive into the world of standards, evolving rapidly. So many initiatives around the world are updating. There's going to be a discussion of the CSA S250 20, which is an update of 25011. So what's happened in the last 10 years? Well, a lot. So Lawrence Arcand, who's been in SUE for over 20 years, he's now president of Foresight Utility Engineers. He's going to go over, he's provided a recorded presentation about the CSA 250-20. And the CSA Group used to be called Canada Standards Association, but this is their S250-20. And so we're going to roll Lawrence's presentation and hopefully have him for Q&A at the end of it. Go ahead and roll the video. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Lawrence Arcand. I appreciate everyone spending their Friday afternoon with me at GeoIgnite 2021. I'm the president of Foresight Utility Engineers, a niche utility engineering provider here in Canada. And I also have the distinction of being the vice chair of the CSA S250 committee. Today, I'm going to talk to you about CSA S250 and particularly the new updated 2020 version. For those that don't know, it's the mapping of underground utility infrastructure standard put out by CSA. So sit back and enjoy. Just a bit of an overview. I'm going to give a little bit of a background with regard to CSA, and then we'll dive right into the standard, give a little bit of a summary about why we created it, what the benefits, some of the new things that are in the S250 2020. Then we'll go through some of the notable clauses. We don't obviously have time to go through all of it, but some of the key sections, and then sum it up with some benefits and opportunities, and then have some questions at the end. So a little bit of a background about CSA Group. It is a not-for-profit member-based organization that was established back in 1919. The CSA Group Standards and Development Organization is accredited by the Standards Council of Canada and in the US by ANSI. There's two main divisions within CSA. There's the Standards Development Organization, which focuses on standards development, research, and training. So that's the one that helped produce the CSA S250. The other group is the commercial subsidiaries, which entails testing, inspection, and certification. And so at the core, CSA is focused on delivering societal good through the breadth of standards that they develop. The overarching goal of the CSA's Standards Development Organization is to ensure that standards they develop enhance the health, safety, and protect the environment, and then facilitate trade. By doing that, they currently develop standards in more than 54 different areas of technology, and they divide those into 12 broader areas, which you can see on the slide here. CSA Group relies on its 10,000 dedicated volunteer members to develop over 3,000 standards and codes. And the CSA Group follows its accredited, balanced, and consensus-based approach in the work that it does. So that's a little background. Now we'll dive right into the standard. So it was first published back in 2011, and it took us about 11 years, or not 11 years, sorry, it took us 5 years. It seemed like 11 years sometimes, but it took us 5 years to get there. Great job publishing back in 2011, but years after it was published, we realized there's a requirement to do some updates. And so back in 2020, we got together, did some more public consultation, looked at some improvements, and pulled together an updated version. So in there, it specifies the requirements for capturing, managing, mapping, and sharing of underground utility infrastructure and records. It's been written for all underground utilities, regardless of the service or project carried or transmitted. And we made a conscious decision that it does not apply to above ground infrastructure. So it focuses on below ground, and it's a today forward standard, not retroactive to plant this in the ground. So why did we produce this? Really, it's a logical step towards mapping best practices, because historically there's been a really high variability in the reliability and consistency of our underground plant. It's unfortunate, but it's the world that we live in. And now we've got some recent technologies and some advances, things like improved ways to capture records, GPS, laser scanning, some imagery, better ways to store the data, GIS, CAD, SharePoint systems, and then enhanced access and sharing mechanisms, things like web services in the cloud. Better technology to do this. And there's really a growing need to share those records throughout the planning and design phase of projects. Some of the benefits that we're hoping to get out of it is to promote the communication and data sharing amongst the stakeholders throughout the life cycle of the projects and assets. Big one is obviously improve reliability and accuracy of the location of our underground infrastructure, mapping and supporting record data. The accurate records are going to improve the safety of the public, the environment, and contractor employees by decreasing utility infrastructure hits and strikes. And then augment and enhance damage prevention programs, things like call before you dig, accurate line locating, prudent excavation, public awareness, one call centers, error and omission. A lot of benefits come out of having better information. So as I mentioned, the original standard came out in 2011, and then there was a requirement to do an update that was completed back in 2020. Some of the key new updates to the standard that came out in the 2020 version are, one is the recognized field data collection technologies that have been now expanded to include things like LiDAR, total station surveys, and video recordings, things that maybe weren't as relevant or prevalent back when the standard was first published. There's also a requirement for mapping records has been expanded to include all stages of operational status, so not just the active, with things like abandoned in place, in service, out of service, and proposed. There's been direction provided to the limitations of digital base mapping, as well as the obligations towards its use. We've got clarification has been provided on how information is collected and used to depict the location, attributes, and the utility infrastructure so that users are confident in its level of reliability and accuracy. We've got new information about owners' responsibility for measuring, recording the location of underground utility infrastructure. There's been requirements for absolute spatial positioning, i.e. the horizontal and vertical datums, and they've been revised. And then accuracy requirements for as-built have been streamlined in the new version. Quick little outline of the standard itself. There's a scope, some reference publications. One of those key publications I'll kind of mention right now is the ASC 3802. I know hopefully some of you were able to listen in on the talk yesterday from Jim Onspach about the updates to the 3802 standard. I had the pleasure of sitting with Jim on that committee and going through all the comments that came back about the changes, and excited to see that it'll hopefully be coming out for publication this summer. Then a section about mapping records, the reliability of those mapping records, section on feature description, and then utility infrastructure specific requirements for mapping. So we'll jump in. So first, from a scope perspective, the standard specifies mapping requirements for recording and depicting underground utility infrastructure and the related appurtenances. Like I said before, it does not apply to infrastructure that's normally above grade, so i.e. Overhead electrical lines, and that it's really focused on the things that are below grade. It applies to proposed, existing, abandoned in place, retired, or reserved for future use infrastructure. And it applies to the generation, storage, distribution, and use of those mapping records to ensure that underground utilities are readily identifiable and locatable. Application of the standards should help capture accurate information about the location and nature of the underground utility infrastructure and make that information available for future projects. So now we'll just look at some of the key clauses that are in here. Like I said, I don't have time to go through everything, but hopefully these will pique your interest. So looking at clause 4 about mapping records, 4.2.1, the general. So mapping records management consists of guidelines, planning, strategy statements, and other documents to enable owners to map their underground utility infrastructure and support continuing conduct of business, comply with regulatory environment, and provide necessary accountability. GIS and CAD records should, and you can see shoulds in bold, and there's a lot of time amongst the committee talking about the difference between the shoulds and the shalls. And so very specifically should be used as a primary records management system for storing, mapping underground utility infrastructure. I think a lot of people would like to see that as a shall, but we recognize that some places just aren't as sophisticated to have a GIS and CAD system, and so better to have something than nothing at all. From a traceability, the program shall have the ability to safely classify, register, preserve the mapping source records that support the data contained in the GIS or CAD or other mapping record system. Looking at discrepancies, so anyone that discovers what appears to be a significant discrepancy during construction, excavation, SU activities, daylighting, or locating or otherwise should report those discrepancies to the owner and or the source of the record in a timely manner. We want to make sure that we're constantly approving that data. So if you see something out there, tell someone about it and let's get it updated. Looking at field records, the data shall be collected contemporaneously during construction to support the mapping of underground utility infrastructure. Field records should be the primary source of mapping information, and the owner shall define the type and format of the field records collected. So it's really up to the owners to figure out, what do I need? How do I want that data collected, and how do I want it depicted? And the owner should provide the mapping records of proposed in-service abandoned utility infrastructure as required. So if someone requests it and needs it, the owner should provide that to them. Another key clause is clause 5, and that talks all about reliability and accuracy of that data, which is what we're trying to do. So clause 5 is intended to apply primarily to the mapping of newly installed utility infrastructure and to existing or legacy utility infrastructure when exposed during the course of subsequent excavation, daylighting, or SU activities. However, it is not intended that these requirements be applied retroactively to existing installations by requiring owners to initiate independent locating activities. So let's do a good job of putting the records for all the new plant in the ground, but we recognize you don't have to go back and dig everything up to create those records. For the owner's responsibility, it's the owner of the underground utility infrastructure shall, at the time the utility infrastructure is constructed or at subsequent time when it's visible and capable of measurement, measure and record the horizontal and vertical location and attributes of that underground utility infrastructure. Other key one, competency. So this was a lot of debate about competency. So persons responsible for measuring and documenting record information shall be competent individuals that follow recognized procedures for field measurements and subsequent transfer to mapping drawings. So some examples of that might be an engineer, a surveyor. It didn't go as far as naming a surveyor or an engineer, but it was left at competent individual, understanding that's really up to the owners to determine what that competent is. One key thing in there is the whole idea of accuracy levels. And so when we're putting information into a record, we're trying to tell the reader of that information how accurate it is. And they've assigned a number of accuracy levels. So 4 of them you can see here. Just reading through accuracy level 1, you can see that the measurements shall be taken and tied into an absolute reference, and so tied into a geodetic system. And that system must be stated on the drawing. And for accuracy level 1, that position must be accurate to plus or minus 25 millimeters in the X, Y, and Z coordinates. So it's got to be pretty tight tolerances. So something you'd think you'd see for like a gravity fed system, a large sewer, or maybe a large diameter pipeline. Accuracy level 2, very similar, except you've got plus or minus 100 millimeters. Accuracy level 3, again, very similar. except it's plus or minus 300 millimeters, and now you can tie it into an absolute or a relative system. So that would allow you to say its distance off a curb line or something in the field that you can measure off of. Obviously, the absolute is by far preferred, but it is understood that you may have to make it a relative thing. And then actually level 4, same thing, but now we're talking plus or minus 100 millimeters. And again, tied into either an absolute or a relative. The next clause is about, clause 6 is all about feature descriptions. And so the purpose is to define the database structure and software specifications as it relate to exchanging electronic mapping data. So some of the key parts in clause 6, 6.5.3, a solid line should be used to depict existing utility infrastructure, and X through the solid line should be used to depict abandoned utility infrastructure. A dash line should be used to depict proposed or future, and hatching may be used to depict an area for proposed or future work. So we try to get some consistency there. Looking at units of measure, dimensions shall be in millimeters. Units of measurement related to position, length, and stationing shall be expressed in meters with a minimum of 1 decimal place, unless otherwise indicated. And utility infrastructure features that are not symbolized should be drawn to scale and placed in such a way to limit the need for dimensions. So we want to create a really good, reliable record. Some key things with clause 7, and this is where you get into specifics about each utility. So specifics about gas and petroleum, specifics about water, specifics about telecom, right? And gets into some of the things that should, shall, or may be measured or recorded. So if we look at 5.1.1, it's specific to things for liquid petroleum and gas. So you see some of the examples there. The following shall be included in the mapping record. So things that have to be there. Horizontal and vertical position, including accuracy levels, cross-section size of the pipe, material type or pipe, material type of pipe or pipeline, material casing, pipeline coating, and cathodic protection equipment such as ground beds, rectifiers, anodes, including the extents. So those are some of the things. Those are some things that shall be there or must be there, and then the should. Some of the things that should be included, things like valves, tees, fittings, plugs, compressor stations, pressure reducing stations, custody transfer stations, metering stations, valve stations, and extents, and then maybe maximum operating pressure. Another key thing in clause 7 is it looks at some of the symbology and line types and labeling of that, and provides some guidelines for which to do it. So you can see on there some of the color codes associated with the line type, some of the labeling with regard to the owner, the type, the size, the accuracy level, and then some of the symbology for key things like valves or hydrants, and some of that are depicted in there as well. So that kind of goes through all that's there. Hopefully, by following those things, we're going to have a lot of benefits and opportunities for the industry as a whole. One is it gives the opportunity for legislation by regulating authorities for those to follow this standard. It gives them something to point at and to refer to. There's an opportunity there for partial adoption via either voluntary by an owner themselves or possibly by contract on a project. Gives an opportunity for an internal review and assessment by utility companies against CSA S250. And just so they can understand how big the gap is and the level of effort that would be required to close that gap versus what they're doing now and being compliant with S250. That obviously may require some modifications to practices or processes, and then procedures. There's a strong theme that companies should use a GIS or CAD system for mapping and drafting, and hopefully most are now. And then CSA S250 could supplement or be referenced by other CSA standards that specify records and mapping. A great example of that is CSA Z662 for oil and gas pipelines. One of the key things, our leader, Laverne Henley, who's the chair of the committee and been around since the very beginning, a great advocate and kind of leads by example with the work he does at Enbridge. You can see a quote there from Laverne. So adopting this standard provides an opportunity to establish information recording requirements, introduce defined positional accuracy levels, and set expectations of data sharing for the mapping of underground utility infrastructure. So Laverne's definitely led by example, and hopefully it leads a lot of others to do the same thing. So I appreciate everyone taking the time. Now I've got an opportunity to do a little round of questions if anybody has any. Okay.
Cool. Now that the video is ended, oops, cool. Now the video is ended. Thanks, Lawrence. We have Lawrence live online for the Q&A session. Now, Geoff, you had put a couple of questions up into the chat box, but if we could have you jump in and ask those directly, but I've got a couple in advance. There was a question about, are you aware of any jurisdictions that are looking into adopting this CSA standard?
Good question, Gavin. Just want to make sure you can hear me loud and clear.
Yep.
Perfect. There's definitely some. I know MTO, Ministry of Transportation of Ontario, has looked at using it on some of the projects that they're working on. A lot of the utilities themselves, like we mentioned, Enbridge and Laverne Henley has been incorporating the CSA standard into the way that they keep all the records in their database. And likewise, when Enbridge and Union combined, obviously they're following those standards for those old Union records as well. One of the things I think that's key is we need to really get more word out there about it and have more jurisdictions follow it and adopt it and get involved. We've said many times before, there's no secret out there that we've got a really poor record of where we've put utility infrastructure in the ground as a general rule. And we have to make a conscious decision to either keep doing what we're doing, which is obviously not working, or kind of draw the line in the sand and start doing a better job going forward. And by following this standard, it'll really allow us to do that, to do a much better job. And then hopefully generations to come down the future kind of laugh when they talk about the way we are today with regard to not really knowing what's underground.
Okay. Thank you. And another question, somebody said that, well, 10% of people are colorblind. Did you any thoughts of making the standards colorblind friendly?
I'll include myself in that 10%. There's conveniences to that. Anytime my wife asks what color I want to paint the walls, or we want to paint the walls, I can defer it to her. And it's something, those color code standards that are in there are universally adopted. It's not just a CSA thing. It's something that goes across APWA and the NULCA and all of it's kind of an industry-wide thing. So I think those are pretty much set in stone, but I think much like if you look at the ASC 38 standard, all those things should be viewable and adoptable, not only in color, but also in black and white. So that's why every line on there, in addition to the color, also has the labeling so that you could see it either way.
Okay. And a question, well, about the shall, should, may. Well, I know in having to do project spec writing, you know, there's different weights of hammer. There's it will, it shall, it should, it may. Is that the order on that? I mean, is shall stronger than should, which of course they're stronger than may?
Absolutely. And so shall being the strongest, and you really, I would say, have no choice, but you shall follow it. Should is kind of a recommendation, and you should do something. And then may is you've got the option, right? It's something you may want to do or may not to do, and something to look at. I can tell you in terms of that committee took almost 5 years to write the original CSA S250, and the debate between should, shall, and may probably took 2 of those 3 years to get some of those things resolved. It's obviously very contentious, and the difficult thing about it is to try to take your own personal hat off and to look at things in the view of the overall context. And what is very easy for you in your environment to do and is a no-brainer as a should may not be, or a shall, I should say, is may not be that easy for everybody else, and therefore it has to be defaulted to a should instead of a shall.
I see. So Joel is saying, how similar is the standard to the new, well, you know, the new US ASCE, as far as what data is captured or should or shall be captured?
And so you're talking about the new UESI standard that's coming out through ASCE. I had the pleasure of sitting on that committee as well. Both Laverne and I sat on it as representing the CSA S250 when they helped develop the new UESI yet to be named standard, or whatever the number is going to end up being. It should be out this year, hopefully. Notice I didn't say it shall be out this year. We'll leave a little bit of room for things to happen. But in a nutshell, they use the CSA as the seed document for creating the new UESI ASC standard. So you'll see a ton of similarities between them. I think there's a lot of good stuff that they incorporate in ASC that when we go and do a next version of the CSA standard, we may be able to pull some of that information off. One of the key things that they took and adopted is the whole idea of creating accuracy levels. So you'll see a lot of similarity between the CSA standard and the new UESI ASC standard where it comes to accuracy levels. For those that dive into it, one of the things you will notice is that they're so close, but they're off by one thing, the difference between Canada and the US. I was a big advocate for trying to make them identical. I, being the only Canadian in there, lost the battle, but it's something that maybe we'll win. We lost the battle, but maybe we'll win the war someday.
There you go. Now, Geoff Zeiss had a couple of questions. Geoff, if you could unmute and jump in and ask those.
Yeah, thanks a million, Gavin. First, Lawrence, I really, this is an incredible effort. Jim Onspach referred to it yesterday, and what you said, that this was the basis for some of the things that are happening in the UESI standard that is supposed to be coming out this year. I mean, I really think this is remarkable. One question, and this kind of relates to a difference between what you see in the 3821 standard and this standard, and maybe that's an unfair comparison, is that there's 5 accuracy levels in the S250 standard.
Yeah.
3 of them, I would say, relate to what would be called quality level A. You know, this is exposed utilities. Maybe one of them refers to C, like, you know, going out and doing a site survey and looking at what's above ground. But it seems like only one of them, level 5, relates to remotely sensed. And given the advances in that technology and remotely sensed, I wonder, is that intentional, or are things just moving too quickly when it comes to new technology, and that this is something that will be expanded in the future instead of just one level, that there may be multiple levels?
Yeah, I think great question, Geoff. And I think the key is the context by which these standards should be followed. So if you look at the ASC 38, it's intended to say, okay, I'm on a project. There are existing utilities sitting in the ground. How do I go out there and create a map of those, while at the same time giving that person who's reading that map an idea of how I gather that information and how reliable that information is, and hence the whole quality level idea with A, B, C, and D.
Yeah.
The CSA standard, and which will be the same as the new ASC one that's coming out, is written from the context of, I'm putting a new utility in the ground. As I'm putting it in the ground, I have the opportunity to capture that data, and hence it's visible to me. I can see it. I can take measurements on it to as accurate and whatever tolerances I choose to capture that information, and hence why you've got that opportunity to go down to 25 millimeters or 100 millimeters or 300 millimeters. And I think those are more related to the type of measuring tool you use, as opposed to what your requirements are. You know what I mean? So I think it's the context. One is I can't even see it, but I'm going to use something to figure it out. The other one is I'm looking at it. I can see it. How accurate do I want to measure it for future use? And then the last one, sorry, accuracy level 5 is that one where I can't see it anymore because maybe it was a directional drill under a roadway, or maybe it was under a lake or whatever, or maybe I just didn't get it in time. So at least tell me within a meter your best guess of where it is.
Okay, that helps tremendously. So if I were going to compare the ASCE standards to S250, S250 would relate to the new UESI, what Jim called as constructed standard that he mentioned yesterday.
Absolutely. It's not a replacement at all for 3802 or 21, whichever one, the newer one coming out.
So in Canada, if you know, for existing infrastructure, really we should be using ASCE 3802 or 3821, whatever it's going to be called. For existing infrastructure, for new stuff going in the ground, S250 would be the relevant one in Canada, and in the US, that would be the new UESI standard. Oh, that helps tremendously. I was really confused about that before.
Yeah, no, great question, but you're absolutely correct. That's the way they're intended to be used.
Right. The other question I had was that I think Metrolinx and Infrastructure Ontario may be looking at S250 because a lot of what they're doing is putting new stuff. You know, there's new stuff going in the ground, and you know, Gord really outlined this perspective that it's being used for transit now. In the future, it will be used for highway right-of-ways. It will be used, and he went on to 9/11 and other stuff where he said, about 80% of infrastructure in Ontario could be covered by this. And I thought he said something about S250.
Yeah, absolutely. And Metrolinx certainly is. And part of that is because, and it's funny enough, I jumped off of a meeting that I'm actually in right now for the Transportation Association of Canada's Public Utilities Management Subcommittee. And as soon as I get out of this Q&A, I'll be jumping back into that meeting. And a great document for those that maybe haven't seen it that has been published by that is called a guideline for the coordination of utility relocations. And there was the original one published back in 2016. There's a new one that's being published this year specifically for P3 projects. And Metrolinx used that P3 TAC document as a seed document for their own utility coordination guidelines on Infrastructure Ontario and Metrolinx projects. And in that guideline, we refer to the ASCE 38 for mapping of existing utilities and the CSA S250 for the mapping of any new utilities that are installed as part of the program that Metrolinx is putting in place. So absolutely, they're jumping all over it.
So in Ontario, this is going to be a big thing.
Absolutely.
S250. Yeah. S250 is going to be a really big thing.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, I just have one little question. This is sort of, this gets into it's somewhere in there you said it should use CAD or GIS. Would that include, we heard about ProStar, we heard about Locus View. I assume it wouldn't exclude systems like that.
No.
Okay.
I think keep in mind the context of when it was written, and some of those things weren't as relevant or prevalent as they are now. And you can see it's even funny in how long we debated the word should versus shall. And I think 95% of the people wanted to be a shall. And then there was a few people in small municipalities in rural parts of the country that said, you can want it to be a shall all you want, but we don't have the capacity to do it. So we have to leave it as a should.
Yeah, all we have is an Excel spreadsheet.
I got a file cabinet full of paper drawings.
Right. Oh boy, Lawrence, fantastic. This has really been a good presentation. I think you've put it in the context of what S50 should be looked at, and that really, if you want to look at existing and new infrastructure, we're looking at ASCE 38 something, and in Canada for new stuff, we're looking at S250.
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks a million.
Okay, thanks, Geoff.
Cool. So we're going to wrap it up, and before we segue into the closing remarks by Geoff, the Zeitgeist, the guy that kind of got this inaugural CUF conference off the ground. Lawrence, hey, thanks a lot. That clarified a lot of things for me as well, because I'm looking at the ASCE and the UESI, the paradigm between those as well. So best of luck with getting this implemented, and the more people that shall use it, the better things will be. No, I think the word shan't could be
There
used.
you go.
There shan't be no damn paper records. No. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm with you, Gavin.
So, yeah, I
Okay.
want to thank Lawrence and all the presenters. All the presenters have been, there's just top professional folks in the way they've handled things and weathered some of our kind of technical glitches and things like that. So I want to thank all those folks, and then Tessa in the background keeping things rolling. The director is back there watching us all. So I'm going to hand this over to back to Lawrence, and back to Geoff Zeiss for the closing remarks for this year's event. You know, Canadian centric, of course, and Canadian content, but the majority is universal. And well, okay, I got to confess, I'm not Canadian, but I live close enough that I can smell the Tim Hortons coffee from here. There you go. Geoff, take it away, sir.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank Gavin. I mean, he has really done an excellent job on emceeing this, and because he's had real world experience in the field, he can ask questions that I think are relevant to any practitioner. So, Gavin, I really appreciate you're taking the time to do this. I also would like to mention John Murphy, who's the guy who started Go Geomatics in Canada. I mean, basically has created a way of the geospatial or geomatics community in Canada to actually come together, starting off with Go Geomatics, then the GeoIgnite conference. He came to me and said, well, wouldn't it be a nice idea to do something about the underground? I had no idea what the demand would be, and it turned out to be really tremendous. And I really do hope this is just the first of many. Definitely want to echo Gavin's thanks to Tessa. Yesterday was just incredibly smooth, and you know, we managed to, and Tessa managed to weather the technical problems we had with transatlantic cables or whatever today. So Tessa, and she's just made it such a pleasure to be involved in this thing. You know, it's sometimes the technical side is really a challenge, but she's just made it very smooth and pleasant too. So those are the three people I want to mention specifically to start with that are associated with Go Geomatics. The other people I want to mention are Ophir Vayner, who's with Forum Analytics, and also Paul Churcher, who's with D&D, because without them, we wouldn't have had the speaker lineup we've had. They really helped bring additional, really critical speakers into the lineup. So I really want to thank both Ophir and Paul for their help in doing that. Gord McElravy has really done just an incredible job in putting together the schedule, you know, making sure speakers are lined up in places that, you know, correspond to their time zones, because as Gavin says, this really has been an international conference. So we've had definitely Canadian content, but, you know, a number of our speakers are coming from other jurisdictions. And then finally, I'd like to thank Prashant Shukla in particular for the panel discussion yesterday about the role of government in this whole area, which I think was really exceptional. It covered so many of the key points that need to be brought up about government enrollment. And I hope this becomes a seed for the things that Gord was talking about, of having different levels of government starting to talk to each other and cooperate to improve the quality of things underground. So again, thanks to all our speakers. Thanks to our platinum sponsors, Lux Modus, Reduct, UEVO, gold sponsors, ProStar and LocusView, and our presentation partners, Leica Geosystems and For Analytics. And I really hope that we'll be able to see each other next year at about the same time.